Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Legislative Committee virtually. Thanks for joining us right now. Happy holidays to everyone. We wanted to just have a December meeting to touch base because when we come back, the next meeting, most likely, we haven't set the date yet, but the legislature will be back in session. Bills have started to be pre-filed, and so we wanted to take some time to check in with our lobbyist, Steve Carroll, to sort of give us a preview of what to expect coming up in the legislative session so we can start to plan. And also, Ms. Kelso and Ms. Nolan are going to give us an update on the Legislative Day of Action, which is going to be bigger and better than ever because we're doing it in uh, um, cooperation with Kansas City Public Schools, who were very jealous of what we did and wanted to get in on the fun. So with that, Steve, if you're ready, I'll turn it over to you. And where'd he go? There he is.
Here I am. Sorry that I lost you there for a minute, Matt. So I didn't hear exactly what you said at the beginning. So I apologize. Something happened. But anyway, happy holidays, everybody. I'll try to keep this fairly short and sweet tonight. I know you all got a lot of things going on. I'm sure I'm very busy at the school trying to get ready for everything. We are gearing up for the legislative session. As you might imagine, it will start on January 4th on Wednesday. So it's early this year. To date, there are already over 800 bills that have already been filed. It's amazing. That's the most bills that have been filed in December so far that I can remember. And I've been doing this now going on 39 years. So there's going to be a lot of activity. We will be coming into a legislative session where we will have brand new leadership in both the House and the Senate, so that you'll know. In fact, I had coffee with Dean Plocher, the incoming Speaker of the House, this morning in Des Peres. He's a personal friend of mine, and we just sat and just talked about the session. He's going to be appointing all new committee chairmen and putting different members on, and we talked about what he thought it was going to look like. He is not, as the past speaker, a per se big education choice legislator. I mean, he believes in some choice, but most of it, I mean, he's not going to be pushing it as his number one priority. I think his number one priority for an education choice bill will probably be the open enrollment issue that he feels that he can probably push in the House, and that is House Bill 253. Now, there is a companion bill in the Senate, Senate Bill 5, that will mandate open enrollment statewide, which will also be basically open enrollment statewide charter schools. So that's another issue that we'll have to deal with. But anyway, the speaker and I, we were talking about it. There's going to be a new majority leader, John Patterson, in the House. He is from the Kansas City area. He is an education choice advocate. On the Senate side, the new president pro tem is Caleb Rowden from Columbia. He's also an education choice proponent. And then the new majority floor leader is Cindy O'Laughlin. She is my state senator. She was the past chairman of the Senate Education Committee, and there's never been a school choice bill that she didn't like. So she will be the majority leader. So we will be working with her. So it's going to be interesting times. I'll simply say it's going to be a tough legislative session again. I think we're very lucky, though, this year that we have the local charter funding issue off the table that we dealt with last year, which was a huge issue for us. And that's by the wayside now that the school, through the foundation formula, is going to fund that. But some of the things that are still out there that they're going to be pushing is the ESA changes. They're trying to expand that program so it's just not so it'd be for all students and just not certain students. They're trying to raise it up to where it's up to 75 million and then continue to increase every year after that. So it's I know that the Senate would really like to expand on that. So that is Senate Bill 255 for you all to know. There are 4 bills, ESA expansion bills in the House: 242, 243, 244, and 332, all of which expand ESAs being introduced by Representative Josh Hurlbut. So we'll be dealing with that issue, obviously. Then there is the statewide charter school expansion bill, which is House Bill 158 and Senate Bill 304, which would allow for charter school expansion in any first-class county or charter county, or in any city throughout the state of Missouri with a population of at least 30,000 people. Also, there are obviously some Parents' Bill of Rights, critical race theory bills. That is Senate Bill 42. And I know that Senator O'Laughlin has said that she is going to push this bill. So it's problematic. We'll have to deal with it. We have some Senate Democrats, obviously, that are not supportive of this. So I imagine we're going to be looking at a filibuster on this issue. There's also, a couple good bills out there, I'm glad to say. One is the minimum teacher salary statewide, which is House Bill 189. Obviously, we pay our teachers more than the minimum that's currently out there, but this would be good for the entire state, I believe, without a doubt. And then also there's our legislation that Senator Roberts put in, Senate Bill 366, which back when Senate Bill 781 passed in 1999, they took away the ability of the local elected board, if there's a vacancy, to fill that vacancy like all other school districts do, and they turned that power over to the mayor. Well, the mayor still has it. The SAB is no longer in place, and this bill would simply take it back to pre-1999 to give us the same power, our local board, to fill those vacancies. So very happy that the senator put the bill in. I know that Kansas City wants to do the same thing. So I think that will have a substitute bill that will allow them to come in to our bill. And then also they have a bill that would, for them, allow them to any district, Kansas City, their bill, that if you have charter schools, that you can have your start date whenever you want to, back again. And so I imagine there's going to be a substitute which will allow the St. Louis public schools to do the same thing as what Kansas City. I've talked to their lobbyist, Chris Ropey, and that's kind of what we have in mind for those two issues moving forward. Matt, I lost the date. I can't remember when we're going to have our school, all the members come down and the parents and stuff. What date is that? Do we have a date?
January 31st. And
January 31st.
Emily and Lori are going to talk about that when you're ready for them.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate that. I can tell you last year, in my opinion, it was a huge success having you walking the halls of the Capitol. I think it paid dividends, certainly on the local funding on the charter school issue. And so I look forward to January 31st this year. Hopefully it'll be even bigger turnout and we can make our mark in the halls of the Capitol. So I really do appreciate you taking the time to come down and help me, because believe me, I need all the help I can get down here with some of this legislation that we're having to deal with. So with that, Matt, I'll stop, answer some questions if there's any. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, questions for Steve.
Steve, I have a question. What is the, do you know what the sentiment is in the rest of the state for open enrollment? I mean, this seems like something that some of these blue ribbon schools not want because they are unable to plan. And like I went to Blue Springs High School, right? And it seems like this is something that even in Blue Springs, they would not want this. And you could garner some support there.
Right. I mean, the school districts do not want this. I mean, the majority of them do not. I mean, if anything, the very small school districts, I mean, they're going to close up. And, you know, consolidation, this is just another word for consolidation out in rural Missouri. But it's the education choice groups are pushing this, and they have convinced the sponsor of this bill, Brad Pollock, who is a former superintendent of Sedalia public schools, that if they just pass this, that the rest of the education choice bills will go away and there won't be a push. And I don't know, that's a flawed logic, that they're not going to go away. And so, yeah, it's terrible for school districts. How do you, plan your budgets? How many students you're going to have? I mean, it's a nightmare. But unfortunately, the education choice folks have told legislators, look, this is the least damaging. If you've got problems with school choice, this is the least damaging one. Well, I beg to differ, and I think the majority of the superintendents out all around the state would agree with me. I know that the cooperating school districts of Greater Kansas City, the 32 school districts over there, they have passed resolutions asking local school boards all across the state to contact their legislators and tell them, no way do we support this. So I think you're going to see some serious grassroots effort to try to stop this.
Steve, I have a couple questions about that. And first of all, this has been a hot topic with the MSBA legislative group, because last year they felt that their lobbyists were being too cooperative with the sponsor. And they, I think this year, redid their platform to make sure that with no question that the MSBA opposes this. But two practical questions, because I haven't read the new bills. But last year, if my recollection serves correct, one, I believe we were exempted because of the DSEG agreement.
That is correct. It's still that way.
And then the devil will be in the details of how this ends up. But I think at least towards the end, and maybe it was that the whole time, is that there was a provision in there that the receiving school district could opt in or opt out. So it couldn't be, there was some sort of guardrails, or is that right?
Well, you can opt out, but you can't opt out from a student leaving your district. So you can opt out that you don't want to take any, but you can't opt out for students leaving. And yes, it still is up to the local school board. So it'd be up to the St. Louis Board of Education. You'd have to vote on it every year on whether you would want to continue to opt out because of the DSEG. So, that questions, what happens if we, get school board members that aren't inclined to do that. So,
and so what about charter schools? Could charter schools receive students from other school districts?
Absolutely. That's why I think this is nothing more than basically statewide charter schools in a way. So, absolutely.
Other questions for Steve about this or other legislation?
I think some folks have their hands raised, Matt.
Oh, I can't see that.
Emily had hers
Emily.
up first. You can go. Yeah.
Gotcha. Emily Kelso.
Yeah, we're going to talk in a few minutes about the day of action and specifically what the asks are, because that was one thing that I think made it really successful. Was our parents went with a very clear ask around House Bill 1552 last year. So we can talk more about what that can look like. But one thing I know I feel very passionately about, and I know a lot of other parents feel very passionately about, if we're going back to Jefferson City in the wake of the tragedy at Central and Collegiate, is some kind of gun control. Is there anything being pushed, any kind of legislation that's being pushed that we could advocate for? I know Peter Meredith is my rep, and he's been talking about introducing some kind of legislation. So can you tell me what bills currently exist on the topic of gun control that maybe we could include in our day of action advocacy?
Well, as we get closer to January 31st, I'll try to provide a list. I don't have one in front of me tonight. I can tell you in my discussion with Speaker-elect Plocher today, Dean's number one priority is going to be crime. And that's one of the first things he's going to push. And he said, I know there'll be some type of push for, gun violence, doing away with guns. He said, Steve, that's a non-starter in the House, and you know that. And I said, I understand, but I said, the cities view this totally different. And I said, there's going to be pushback. unfortunately, it's basically all Democrats from the two cities and not Republicans, unfortunately. So it, I need to see what Dean, and he hasn't released what his crime package is going to be and what it looks like yet. And I'll probably know that by the second week of January. So we may want to, I'm sure we're going to have several more of these calls before January 31st, but I can certainly, I'll know more then after I see that. And what I don't want you to go down there and, talk about 2 or 3 bills that have absolutely no chance of passing.
No.
It defeats the purpose.
No,
So
but I do think it's really important, and I'm hearing from our parents that it's important that they raise their voices around this particular issue.
absolutely.
And so it would be really helpful if there was a specific piece of legislation that we could advocate for, understanding the environment that we're walking into. I mean,
Sure.
that's one of the things we're going to make it clear. But I was going to, like, I think I mentioned this before, but Peter Meredith was talking about. So that could be someone you could talk to if there's a piece of legislation that he's sponsoring.
Okay, but that absolutely, I'll have a couple bills for you all to look at and see what suits you best. Not a problem.
Gloria.
Thank you so much. And I had the pleasure of joining in with the teachers union yesterday for their legislative breakfast. And there were a few things that came up in that conversation as well. And so there were specific things about gun legislation, and it wasn't necessarily the red flag laws that Peter Meredith brought up, but they had another angle with the union, and I would love to have Samuel Charles speak to that if he could. And then the other issue that was raised was about the charter school board. What is it with? I think it was Robin Wabi who's leading that. So that commission and the, I guess the removal of that body overseeing the, I guess the charter school commission for the state. So that all of those things came up, and I definitely wanted to see where there was a merger of those two. So that was the first thing that I wanted to lift. And then the other question that I had was, do you have any examples of states who are doing this open enrollment, and how is it working out there? Like, is there anything that we can point to when we're making our case for being for or against this legislation?
There is. We keep using, if you allow me to address that, Kansas has had a great deal of problems with this, especially from the standpoint of sports, because schools are going in and trying to get athletes to come to theirs and play. Now, the sponsor of the bill says, that he's taking care of that because they can't play for a year. Well, the way it's written, I think you're going to see a big problem with this. In talking with the Cooperating School District of Greater Kansas City, they're next to the Kansas side, and they see it all the time, and it's very problematic. And then in Iowa, I think they have it where they cap it at 3% of the student population. It can be no higher than that. Then they would shut it down that year. And so the sponsor of the bill says it works much better in Iowa, but the problem there is, I think, what we're talking about, not so much in the larger cities, but in Iowa, there's a lot of small school districts, and they have consolidated because of this. And I mean, it's no different than we losing a school in a neighborhood, which it destroys the neighborhood. You lose a school in a small community, it just devastates that small community. So, in a way, it's a micronism of what we're dealing with. So I think I can have some talking points for you when you all come down January 31st about the problems with open enrollment as well. So I'll certainly make a note of that.
And I've been hoping that the county school districts, all 32 or whatever of them, would see this as the threat it is to them, because I can't imagine the chaos that's going to mean, especially for, I mean, we've already seen when we had school districts where they could go to other school districts because of the unaccredited, that
Right.
issue. So this is just basically making that open to everybody.
Yes.
And I'm not aware that Education Plus or they had a subcommittee of school boards we haven't even met about legislative issues are even doing anything on it, which is concerning because like I said, we are exempted. The thing that it's going to mean the most is charter schools are, can attract people easier from the county. Now that again won't affect our enrollment. That's going to affect county enrollment, but it is going to, affect the city education system. But it's exempt us, so it's not a major concern. I don't see it, but I mean it's a major concern statewide. So I certainly want to stand in solidarity, especially with our county school districts who I don't think have heard the alarm bell yet.
I would agree with you. I'm a little concerned about Education Plus. The county schools just, aren't getting involved in St. Louis County like they are over in the Kansas City side. Because I mean, they've got their alarms up over there.
Isaac.
Thank you. I have 3 questions. The first is, so in terms of the open enrollment bill, the sending school would be paying whatever tuition the receiving school district set. Is that right? The same way that it currently works?
Yeah, they would be getting the state aid. There is talk that they may change it, that the sending district would keep the local funds and only the state dollars would follow that student. They're throwing that out in an effort to try to get more support for it.
Thank you. And then I know that we're not affected the way it's currently written because of the DSEG agreement, and this question might be for others in the room. The DSEG agreement, my understanding is it's phasing out. And so does that go until like the very last child goes through the DSEG agreement, or is it now, given that like we're not receiving new kids?
Well, I think that more or less deals with the VIC program. I'm not sure that's once that phases out, if DSEG is totally done after that.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think it is. But again, it would still, the local school board, whomever, is elected in St. Louis City, they would have to vote on it every year. And so we certainly, you would have to watch, I guess, to make sure that the school board would want to vote to stay out of it, because that would be devastating for the city of St. Louis.
And then my last question was, I know that there's 2 other priorities that we've discussed, in other meetings, in terms of, number 1, a feasibility study for any new charter schools that comes up. And the second is increased funding for schools that have high mobility. So I don't know if have those been coming up? Are we looking for sponsors for those bills, or are we just sort of holding on that yet?
No, the one for student mobility, we're still shopping that around, trying to find a sponsor for it, because obviously that would affect the foundation formula. Now, there's talk too that even if we don't get a bill for that this year, because I don't think they're going to tackle the foundation formula, it's whenever you have a bill that opens that up, I mean, that just causes chaos. And so there's been talk amongst Senate leadership and Charlie Shields, president of the state board, that the life of the foundation formula is coming basically to an end of the current one. And there's talk that next year they may go in and start looking at revamping the foundation formula. And I think that's the perfect opportunity at that time to get another weighted factor in that I've always thought student mobility should be a part of. So we're trying to keep that in mind. And whether this year may not be the best year to push that, but I don't think it hurts to get that issue out before the legislators now, so they think about that for next year if they do in fact go and look at redoing the formula.
That's great news. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And his other question was about our first priority about the feasibility studies, and I'll let you talk about whether or not you've heard any interest, but we talked a little bit about with the legislators who kind of gave us an opening to talk about it yesterday at AFT. I think we still have a little work on our end to do in terms of finishing our efficiency study that Linda Quinley's doing. I checked in with her today, so that hopefully should be forthcoming to make the case. But in terms of all of this stuff that's coming down the pike in terms of charter expansion, they did seem open to at least having that issue in their back pocket. So rather than a standalone bill, as last year when the 1552 fix came, they added accountability measures for charter schools. They were very interested, our local legislators, in that concept. So I'll let Steve talk a little bit more about that. I think we have a little more work to do on that. That's kind of how I think Steve and I, when we talked about it before, that's how we envisioned it.
Right. No, that's true. And I mean, there will be debate on the Senate floor for sure about statewide charter school expansion, because Senator Eigel is really pushing that. And if that comes, that will be an opportunity for one of our senators to offer an amendment to at least get the discussion out there on the Senate floor that, you know, enough's enough. And you want to do these statewide. Well, there needs to be some accountability. There needs to be some caps, because there's just too many schools for the students that we have. So we'll definitely get an opportunity to bring that to light and get it on the floor for debate, in my opinion.
Lori, before I get to Ms. Hubbard, you had your hand up. Do you still have a question?
Isaac hit one of them, and that was the feasibility study. And then I wondered, Mr. Carroll, short of getting someone to sponsor a bill with regard to the gun legislation, is there a way that we can, or time or opportunity in the year that we could make a stand, just go to the Capitol and make a stand for gun safety? I know that the actual national day does not happen until June, but just to make our, have a letter written, have it read into the record, or is there a way short of having it in a bill that we could work with?
Well, I mean, you could have one of our legislators draft a resolution to get read into the journal in the House and the Senate. There were groups that came down last year that, had their legislative day, on gun violence as well. So, I mean, certainly that's always a possibility. It's just, it needs to be well thought out so it doesn't fall on deaf ears.
I agree. Thank you.
Ms. Hubbard.
I'm so glad that my son has finished playing clarinet. My question kind of goes along with the accountability part of things. I keep thinking that for the sake of charter family, we need to have like a parent right to know or Bill of Rights for charter schools to like say right up, like we have so many years left on our charter. We are doing good or we're not doing good. We're this much in debt. Like, I just keep thinking of parents at Confluence who knows what would have happened if we hadn't stepped in to sponsor their kids' school. And I think like it has all the right marks for what, Republicans like, but it would also be helpful for everyone.
Is that a question to me, Emily, or?
Yeah, can that happen?
Well, I mean, currently on DESE's website, I mean, they have the ASBR report that talks about every aspect of a charter school, where they're at, where they spend their money, just like it's a portal, just like for the St. Louis public schools and other public schools all across the state. I think the biggest problem is that most parents don't know how to access that. And if there was some way that we could get a comparative sheet out there, or just provide more information, I think, to parents on what's actually going on with that particular charter school. And,
could we get the charter schools to be forced to provide that information before parents enroll?
I'm
'Cause
sure
that's-
they would, if
I mean-
that was legislative down there, I'm sure the charter schools would fight that tooth and nail.
I know, and then it would show what their agenda is, because parents should deserve to know how long their school might exist. I mean, just like public school parents would like to feel confident that their neighborhood schools are going to be around.
Right. Well, it was like last year. I mean, we showed them the facts on 1552 on what's the costs were for St. Louis, versus the charter schools and what we were doing, what the charter schools were not having to do. And with some legislators, they don't care. They're so pro-choice charters that they don't care. And so that's very unfortunate. But so to get them to do it, I mean, we'd have to have help with Senate leadership, and that's just not going to happen. So we may have to do it in another way around the legislative process.
Closing charter schools suddenly and without notice is considered a success by the pro charter school, pro school choice people. And so it's hard to they're like, oh, good, they closed. That means the system's working. That's the mentality you're up against. Ms. Cousins.
Hey, Tony.
Hey, Steve. I wanted to piggyback on what Lori was asking about. I know we had met with the president of the national president of the teachers union, and that was one of the things that we were actually talking about, especially with Representative Meredith in regards to the guns. So I know I kind of came in and out on when I think Gloria was talking, or you all were talking about going up to Jeff City, but I think that's part of something we probably need to look at, aligning the other entities to kind of position ourselves to be prepared for something like that. I think we can't wait, Lori, like what you're saying, until June, if that's when they're doing it. We need to identify which one of the multiple gun bills I'm sure that they're going to have in Jeff City coming before us, and kind of see how or what we need to do to be a part of that actual movement.
Good point.
Dr. Charles, your hand, is it up again?
Yeah, so thank you, Ms. Nolan, for recognizing what AFT did yesterday. What we did with AFT yesterday was we came to it from an approach of recognizing the fear of what the middle of the state is thinking. Like, I have a bunch of family in the middle of the state, and if we don't recognize that fear, then we're going to lose every time, because they want to keep their guns. And so you've got to say, okay, we're doing all these things to protect your gun ownership rights. And so I think that if we got to be careful with our wording. We can't go at it straight on, because if we do, like what Steve said, then it's dead in the water, because they're killing it. So we have to be careful with our language. We got to use code words. We got to code it, because they will kill what we want unless we use the right words. And I think that sometimes Peter Meredith, God love him, he's a champion for us, but we can't go straight at the problem. We got to go around it. That's all.
I mean, Peter is a champion for the city, and no question about it. Unfortunately, because he is always up front and center on issues, when he gets up and speaks on the House floor. I mean, he's even told me this when I've gone to him and say, hey, how about this amendment? He said, why don't you get somebody else, Steve? Because when I get up and speak, half of the other side of the chamber automatically shuts me out. And, he understands that. And so we have to get around that. So I agree with you.
I actually just gave Peter as an example because of just what you were saying, what you both were saying. He's always that person. But I think during this time that we have others that are definitely interested in wanting to be a part of what we're trying to do and addressing it. And I like what you were saying in regards to making sure we're saying the words and not running or counterparts who love their guns, but making sure we're showing, even if it's pushing gun safety or whatever the case may be. It's
Yeah.
not saying take your guns away, but gun safety, and just kind of identifying which elected official on the state level that we can say, hey, this is something that we want to help you kind of, push forward. It may even be a Republican that we kind of be able to tie in and get that something like that going.
Right.
Because
And
at the end
I
of the
think
day,
Dean Blocker may be the one that could help us somewhat with that. And I really believe that. So that's something to think about.
because at the end of the
The
day,
other point that was-
we have got to protect our kids like that. We
Yes.
got to, whatever we got to do to protect these children, we got to do that thing.
I think the
You gotta
other
say
point
those
that was
words.
raised outside of just guns and that safety, I know Meredith mentioned red flags, and that's kind of, a red flag to them
Yeah.
or whatever. But the issue was raised around mental health and funds that are on the table to really support that, and accessing those funds so that we can make sure that our students and our communities are safe around that. So that's another angle I think would be worthy.
And
So
I
that
think
was all-
I do believe you will see some additional funds for mental health this year. I mean, the state's setting on an additional, $2.3 billion out there. So, that's why they're talking about raising the teacher salaries and things. So I think there will be funding for some mental health programs to try to touch on this for sure.
Steve, I think it's the Biden administration passed something called the Community Safety Act.
Yes.
It was bipartisan. Blunt was a champion of it. He voted for cloture in the Senate.
Yes.
And so, I think that's what they were talking about for mental health. Those were the funds that I think they were talking about.
Okay.
You know what I'm
Well,
talking about?
Yeah.
Those
and-
funds, I believe, will flow through DESE and will be grant opportunities for the district. I've already seen surveys that DESE is already trying to figure out guidelines on how they would allocate that based on need. Hopefully other people in the district got it. Maybe I should afford it. I filled one out. So I know that will be coming. In one of we approached this last year because it is such a third rail to talk about gun control in Jefferson City, to approach it from the aspect of trauma, and the trauma particularly caused by gun violence in our schools. And I think that, to your point, Gloria, that's still a very good way for us to approach it, because, the governor has stated openly that there needs to be more mental health support. And I know that we certainly are sort of on the forefront in terms of providing services to children who have been affected by gun violence, because we have so many of them. And I thinking about Dr. Pollack and Dr. Williams about Dr. Smith's presentation at the principal redesign about Bashan, and that was one of her components, is to add they've got that therapy room, I believe, at Bashan, to add therapists and that. So I think, there are certainly opportunities where our district can be on the leading edge. And since there is a willingness, I think we should take advantage of it in terms of, and then, I think this is probably a good segue to turn it over to Emily and Gloria. We had talked about a couple of things in terms of gun control, and Steve, I'm so glad you brought up all those points, and the legislators, Peter was out there saying, he was going to ask for everything and hope that he can get something, and that is kind of his role. Other legislators came up to us, they're like, well, I got a bill that's tucked into one, I got a bill that's tucked into one, so it's going to be one of those things. I think there's two things. One, I think we've already know the power of the individual stories from our families and our students, and how that means so much when we go up to Jefferson City. But Emily, you're absolutely right. We sort of owe that to our families, to give them a vehicle and a voice to do that. So while it may get tricky because the details of certain legislation and who sponsors it and the wording that's in it and who supports it is going to be difficult for them to wrap their brain around, because they just don't want to hear it. I do think that the human element that we bring to it about what our families have gone through is going to be so important, and that's a good approach. I also think, and we've talked about this before, given our particular situation, we need to work with law enforcement because this is a law enforcement issue, and there are parts of the legislation as it currently exists that is deeply flawed and objectionable to law enforcement. And what we went through was an example of that. So you can avoid labels like red flag laws, but point to specifics about, we have a textbook case of how the law is broken. It puts students at risk. It puts law enforcement at risk. And so that has always been kind of my thought about the approach for the messaging. That's harder than just saying, we support HB whatever. But I also think maybe it's not. Maybe it's easier because then you don't have to worry about the mechanics of legislation. You can just tell the truth about what we know and what we lived through. So anyway, sorry. With that, Emily, Gloria, if you're ready.
Yeah. Cheryl, if you wouldn't mind enabling screen sharing, I'd love to be able to share just one slide real quick. Great, thank you.
You're now the host, so you'll be able to share, Emily.
Thank you very much. All right. Show you this slide so that you can see. Okay, so we are returning to Jefferson City. Can everybody see this, by the way? Cool. We're returning to Jefferson City on January 31st. Like we said, we wanted to get this date out there. We've advertised it at the last 2 Parent Action Council meetings. So we're spreading the word to get people to sign up and fill out specifically a survey that I can drop the link to. But and we haven't really been advertising it as a day of action for a specific cause yet, because wanted to have this meeting, wanted to have the opportunity to see what bills are coming through the legislature. But at the last 2 PAC meetings, the conversation has been, what would you want to go to Jeff City for? What do you think is important? And gun control is coming up quite a bit. You're right, Matt. A lot of parents aren't going to know a lot about open enrollment. They have no idea what that is and why that's going to impact them. And we can do some work around educating them, but that's not the same kind of impact that they bring as when they talk about the impact of things like gun violence and trauma on their day-to-day experiences. So we will need to think about that. And I think that's the power in a day like this. We are aligning with Kansas City Public Schools. So Gloria and I have been working with a partner over there to get some of these logistics figured out. And so here's the schedule as we currently know it. PAC has already secured a bus. So we are bringing a charter bus again. It's going to leave at 7 a.m. from 8:01, as long as it is okay with district officials that we validate parking for parents. That worked really well last year, and we'd like to do the same thing. So if they can park in the garage at 8:01, then we can leave at 7 from St. Louis. It means we're in Jeff City by 9. And then we can arrange a schedule between 9:30 and 12:30-ish to meet with legislators. We're going to want to talk a little about doing this a little bit differently, I think, than last time. Maybe breaking those groups up a little bit more, assigning just certain people to the doors outside the floor and others to meet with specific legislators. But we can talk more about the logistics of what that 9:30 to 12:30 piece is going to look like. And then we have booked the rotunda this year. So last year we got a lot of really great pictures of our rally on the steps that made it into the newspaper and onto actual like charter school advocacy websites that like stole our photos because they looked so good. So this year we're going to do it inside because it was really windy last year and it would be nice to do it inside. So we booked the rotunda and that will happen at 1 o'clock. And then at 2 o'clock, the plan is to leave Jeff City. So that's when the bus will leave. If any parents choose to drive themselves separately, they can leave anytime they want, but the goal is to have everybody back by 4, which this is roughly the schedule we followed last year, and it seemed to work pretty well for people. So we're keeping it that way. And then Gloria can talk a little bit more about the trainings that we're going to be providing, because she's kind of taking point on that. But I'm going to drop the survey link in the chat. The main thing we need right now is for people to really spread the word to parents. We've been pushing this out through family and community specialists, through the Office of Family and Community Engagement. There will be a note about it coming out in the digest. Talked to Jordan today about using things like Peach Jar and stuff like that to really push this survey out. And we would love the kind of ambitious goal. We took about 40 parents last year. We would love to take closer to 100 this year from SLPS, plus however many are coming from KCPS. That's an ambitious goal, but it's one I think we can meet. And it would be extra excellent if we could have representatives from every SLPS school. So I met with the family and community specialists at the beginning of this year at their back to school training, and challenged them to identify back in August or September, challenge them to identify parents that would be good for this work. And so now it's about reaching back out to them and going, have you found those parents? Have you found those parents? So we're really beating the drums to get parents at least to book this date kind of on the calendar. And then Gloria can share a little bit more about the training sessions that we're going to lead, and I will get the survey link so we can drop that in the chat.
Hey, Emily, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Your rally that you're scheduling at 1 o'clock, are you going to have a couple legislators speak for a few minutes at that rally, or is this?
Currently don't have a plan for that rally, but that would be great.
I mean, I could try to set up a couple, a senator and a rep, I think would be really good if they're willing to address the group.
That'd be
That
great.
would be excellent. Definitely something that we want to make sure that it is very impactful, and that we hear the voices of our legislators, and that they are able to also hear from us. In terms of the training, it's scheduled 2 this time, 1 in the evening on the week before, so that January 25th at 6 o'clock. So that'll be the evening training. And then we'll have another one on that Friday before at 10 o'clock in the morning. And so just providing a variety of times so that we can catch parents at the time that's most suitable for them. In the training that we had for our last visit, I kind of really focused in on having just kind of your voices in the space, Steve. Matt joined us to help us understand what the bills were and what were our yeses and what were our nos. And it was important for us to kind of have that information, and we shared that with parents. We had a nice write-up describing those bills and what yes and no meant for us and how it would impact our community. So I'd like to do that again, and what we were leading with. And then we also talk specifically about, what our day, would look like. So we spelled out the logistics for everybody on that call. And we also talked about, how we were going to break down our group. And so I kind of tried to do a little bit of division of the teams on the front end before we got there. And so everybody had their little cheat sheets, but with the names and all of the room numbers and things like that, so that they would know how to navigate the Capitol. And we tried to just have different groups going into different spaces so people weren't running all over the place. And so I'd like to kind of revisit those documents that I had and be able to kind of break down our day of action schedule for our parents. And so it's in bite-sized chunks, and that we have small groups going in and speaking to those legislators. Seemed like something really big was going on when we were there. They were drawing maps or something. And so there was a lot of people.
That was redistricting. Yeah,
yes,
redistricting
okay,
was going on. And that occurs only every 10 years. So that will be a problem for this coming session. But the problem is going to be is we have 57 new legislators this year out of 197 because of term limits. So we're just now learning where the offices are of the reps and the senators. We don't know yet who's even on the different committees. So I will know that by the second week of January, and we will have a list of all the office numbers and where to go, their phone numbers, and the committees they're serving on. So we'll get that to you, Gloria.
Oh my goodness, as soon as we thought we had our system down, they go and change it. Rascals.
That's
No.
that's the legislative process.
We will definitely be in conversation then to figure that out, and so that we have our game plan, and so that we are making the most of our time, because we have short bursts. But we'd like to make sure that the parents know, where they are, and then having some experienced people kind of split up in the different
Sure.
groups.
Yeah,
so
we'll
that
help
they
you
can lead
however
that
we can.
process. Absolutely. And so I'm ready to, I guess when we get back from the break, just jump right in so we can get this all scheduled and figured out of how we will navigate that day.
So
On
Ms.
that-
Bullen-
on that-
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So I just wanted to say on that note, Steve, to kind of put a deadline on some of that. I think it's helpful to kind of just have that in our heads. Do you think you could get that information to Gloria so we can start prepping those training materials? Do you think you could have that by January 13th, which is a Friday?
So tell me exactly what you want by January 13th.
Names.
So yes, those room numbers.
The
and
names, the room numbers, things like that. Oh, that's not a
Yes,
problem.
and then the committee assignments as you spoke.
I think,
about, and so-
yeah, Dean Blocker said it would be the second week of January before he releases the committee assignments, I think. Now, the Senate should probably be quicker. But yeah, I don't think by the 13th that should be a problem. I should have everything to you by then.
Thank you. That gives time to assemble a lot of that material before these training sessions.
Sure, not a problem.
Very good. It'll be a quick turnaround, but we definitely are up for the job.
I just
I
wanted to
don't doubt it a bit.
I just wanted to take a moment again and commend both of you, Mrs. Kelso, Mrs. Nolan. You guys did an excellent job last year. And so I want to make sure that we are supportive this year. I know I showed up at 7 and we made sure you had everything that you needed. So I want to meet with both of you the first week when we return so we can sit down and really be intentional about the needs, and we can support the work as we move forward. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
It's my post-Christmas gift.
It'd be great.
Okay, well,
Wait,
we've got,
Tony's got her hand up.
oh, yes, Ms. Cousins.
Really, Mr. Davis? I'm listening to what Gloria and Emily are doing, and I just wanted to throw it out, something that I noticed when we were at the MSBA conference. Even the county schools were asking like how and do they get involved, and they would love to be a part of going up to Jeff City. I mean, they made that definite statement that you guys are making, like at some point it's going to hit with us. I'm curious if there's any way you guys can identify who their PTO leads are in the county, just to say, we want to let you know we're doing this. If you're interested in being a part of it, by all means, kind of give them the schedule just to let them know. And I think that will really show a huge impact of that collaboration. And where it's really a parent action, where all the parents are saying, hey, let's raise the alarm of what's going on. And the other thing is with what Steve was saying, my hope is before you're training, you all's training, we will know which bills that are there that are tied to guns or the mental illness, whatever the case may be that surrounds the concerns that you all may have, to be really focusing on that parent action day. Those are kind of the things I will hope that you're pulling from Steve to get you geared up and ready for what the 31st will actually look like.
For sure. Tony, can I ask, when we say the county getting in touch with like county PTOs, are there specific groups we need to be looking at? Because like, I think the county, and I don't even know where to begin with contacting people in the county. So who specifically do we need to be identifying?
I have two lists.
Yeah.
First of all, there's I don't have PTOs, but I have school board members from county school districts that were part of this legislative collaborative. I don't know. We went to that thing. I don't know what it's called, but I've got a list, so I can reach out to them. I've been meaning to. And then also, I've got a list of school board members who participated at the MSBA conference when Jennifer Wolfsey and I spoke about legislative committees, and that's probably 30. And we've already reached out to them because many people came up to us afterwards and said, "Hey, let us know when you're coming," because they would just like to participate. So I'll follow up on those two.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for raising that point.
Ms. Cousins loves to give me more work to do.
No, Ms. Cousins, thank you. No, I mean, because we're thinking about, we're like putting it all together, and we had already been in conversation with Kansas City, but we, the county districts are in our backyard. And even when we went last year, there were conversations of some North County districts that were collaborating, and we were in conversation with them, but it didn't quite take off like we wanted. And so this is a great time to revisit that and really work on building coalition, because that is what will help us bridge, build, and win the issue.
Ms. Willis, and then at 7 o'clock.
Just point of clarification. When we talk about engaging Kansas City and engaging the county schools, what are we engaging them around? How are we separating our priorities with our own school district priorities with what we're engaging them with? Or are we saying that we have some shared concerns, or are we talking about gun violence?
So, yes. So it's figuring out. It's figuring out where there is alignment. And so if there's a bill that we all, agree to, we're saying yes on Senate Bill 781 or whatever. We're joining forces on that. And then there's this broader piece around, safety and mental health that we're all standing for. And so there are things that are going to be specific to the different districts. And so where we don't align, they can advocate with their legislatures as we break off into those small groups and talk about their issues specifically with those legislators. And we'll do the same for ours. But as a united front, when we're rallying and doing things like that as a larger group, we will speak to the good of the group.
I would definitely share. I mean, I think, Lori, to what you're asking, what they're actually doing is sharing what our priorities are. And 9 times out of 10, what our priorities are, they're basically wanting to be in alignment with that. That was a lot of the conversations that they were having with us, because they were like, we don't know where to start in regards to legislation. So I think this puts them not only in rallying and supporting, but it also helps in educating them on how important their role and their voices are in supporting what we're doing, because it's affecting them as well. Guns, mental health, all of that is a factor across the board. That's not just a St. Louis City issue. That's a St. Louis, Missouri issue, or that's a Missouri issue as a whole. So that's the reason why I was presenting that, to say that, because that was one of the key things that I took away when we were constantly asked, how do we be a part of what you're trying to do?
Right. No, I'm following. I'm processing the timeline, because we talked about January 31st. And I'm also going to offer to Matt, there is another way to get that information out. Once we figure out what our platform is going to be and we publicize it and we invite them to call this number to join in, we can work through the governmental classes to do it. So we've got Education Plus to help us, and Missouri School PR Association. So those are other resources if that's going to be how we approach it.
And I think I understand some of your hesitancy there too, because and I know last year we were kind of, sort of, with the Senate, with the 1552, Kansas City and St. Louis, we were kind of in different spaces on that. But there were definitely other spaces where we had synergy and things like that. And so we figure out the workaround.
And Lori, it's very fair to be hesitant because quite frankly, like we haven't nailed exactly what that language looks like yet. Like that's still very much in process, but this meeting was helpful
Yep.
to getting some of those ideas down on paper. We just hadn't had one of these meetings yet. And starting after the new year, we're going to hit it hard and there will be a lot happening in January. So buckle
Yay.
up. It's going to be we're going to start the new year with a bang. And we bumped up the timeline a little bit because last year, you might remember, we went in like early February, and
Yeah.
just in talking to some folks, it was like the sooner you can get here, the better. So that's why it's an ambitious timeline and it's a tight timeline, but I think it's doable. So the main ask we have right now of everybody is to spread the word with that survey to any parent community groups that you have, any groups that are interested or people that are interested in attending. That survey is going to help us know what it is that we need to plan for logistically. So as we start creating those groups and thinking about who's going to go where, having a record of that on the survey, even if we're going to invite some of these county groups or other outside school districts, it's helpful if we know that they're going to be coming, or at least that they have some kind of record that way. So
That's
it's
really
the main thing we need right now.
Yeah.
So the survey is in the chat. If anybody needs it, that's the link to the survey. You can use
Thank
that.
you.
Steve, I just want to take a moment and thank you. As I transition into the role of interim superintendent in January, I think you and I will work very, very closely together. So I look forward to reaching out to you and talking with you about the areas that you framed this evening. So thank you.
Thank you. My office is here to assist you in any way I can. So I appreciate that very much.
So it sounds like we probably need to have probably 2 meetings in January. And so I'll try to, yes. Is that a yes, Gloria? Or is that
I
a
said
no?
we need 5 meetings.
Okay, I'm giving you 2 because I got a lot of other meetings. But I you can have it without me. So we'll try to get those on the books as soon as possible, and I'll try to arrange that with everybody. Is the Zoom preferable, especially if we're getting the quick hit down and dirty planning meetings? Okay, I see mostly head nods.
It's probably best for me anyway, with session starting.
I actually find this totally productive. So, but it's good to see. We'll plan some in-person ones later. Maybe there'll be celebrations or something. We never had a celebration last year. So we'll look for 2 to try to get 2 meetings on the books to do some of these updates and some of these coordinations. I think we all have our homework. And we can all, be in contact in the meantime. But thank you all. Happy holidays. If you're traveling, travel safe. We'll see you next year.
All right. Happy holidays to you all as well.
Happy
All right.
holidays.
Happy holidays,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Happy holidays.
And Emily and Gloria, reach out to me, whenever you need to. You have my cell phone number. Call me. We'll get back with you. I'll try to put that together. If I can get it before the 13th, I'll
Yeah.
make sure I get it to you. As soon as
Great.
I
Thank
get it,
you.
you'll have it.
Thank
Remember
you.
you
Steve.
said that, Steve.
Yeah.